When I talked with Bishop Paprocki about the winner of this year's Bishop Sheen Award, without hesitation, he said Bishop Barron. Not only that, Bishop Paprocki successfully recruited Bishop Barron to be here. Bishop Paprocki will introduce Bishop Barron. Just in case Bishop Paprocki wasn't going to mention it, Bishop Barron can wax eloquent about the beauty and excitement of baseball. He can also explain the infield fly rule.
Thank you, Pat. It is a real joy, a privilege, and a pleasure for me to introduce this year's recipient of the Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen Award. Bishop Robert Barron and I have known each other now for about 40 years. Back before either of us became a bishop, we were fellow priests here at the Archdiocese of Chicago. I was doing my graduate studies in canon law at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, and then Father Barron was doing his doctoral studies in theology at the Institut Catholique in Paris. And on one of my trips home, I was flying Air France. And so going from Rome to Paris to Chicago, and I was able to do an couple extra day layover in Paris for $25. So it was a pretty good deal. And so Bob hosted me, and not only hosted me there, but gave me a personal tour of Paris, one of my most memorable experiences. And if you've seen the TV or the video series that Bob has put together on Catholicism, where he's basically showing around different places, that's what he did with me, showing me Chartres and Sainte-Chapelle and Notre Dame Cathedral. And I kid that's where he got the idea to do the Catholicism series. Like, I'm showing people around, I might as well make videos out of this, which he did. I think it's very fitting, appropriate, and providential that this award is named after Archbishop Fulton Sheen, and that's why when Pat asked me, the name that popped right into my head was Bishop Robert Barron, because in many ways I think that Bishop Barron is the Fulton Sheen of our time. I'm old enough to remember, and I was looking around the room, I think some of you are old enough to remember when Fulton Sheen had a primetime television program. And for our younger members of the audience here, to put that in perspective, this was in the 1950s and 60s. They didn't have cable TV and the hundreds and maybe even thousands of stations that we have today available on streaming or on the internet or wherever. It basically was the three networks, primary networks on 2, 5, and 7, WGN on Channel 9, and public television on Channel 11. You had 5 stations. And prime time, Bishop Sheen beat out Milton Berle and Frank Sinatra in the ratings. And so Frank Sinatra, the singer, and Milton Berle, the comedian. The amazing thing, Bishop Sheen did that. He didn't tell jokes and he didn't sing songs. What did he do? He preached the truth. And his program was called Life is Worth Living, and that's what people wanted to hear. And so I think that he was a real pioneer in his time in terms of using the media and getting the word out there. And Bishop Barron has certainly done that, using the media in our time. Bishop Sheen used to have like 30 million viewers a week. And Bishop Barron has had his videos on YouTube have been viewed by over 90 million people. So I think it's very fitting to give this award this year to I think someday there will be a Bishop Robert Barron Award too. But for this year, please welcome the Bishop Sheen of our time, Bishop Robert Barron.
Oh, is this the... Just beautiful. All right. Well, thank you. That's a beautiful award. If I can put it next to Father Presta. Well, Bishop Paprocki, thank you, and Pat, thank you very much, and to everybody involved in this award. I'm really honored by it, and to see that lovely portrait of Sheen, who's a hero of mine. I've got a little bust of Fulton Sheen on my desk in Rochester, kind of looking over my computer, so judging me as I write. But he's been a hero for a long time. And I think he's a figure of great importance for the church today. And in these very brief remarks I'm going to make, I'm going to try to make that case that Sheen really matters for our time. You know, a very interesting thing, I don't think it's been really searched out sufficiently. Go back 75 years, go back to the mid-20th century. There was this extraordinary flowering of the Catholic intellectual and literary life. Just think of these figures: Graham Greene, Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day, Jacques Maritain, Evelyn Waugh. And if you widen the scope a little bit to include Protestants, you get W.H. Auden, C.S. Lewis, Reinhold Niebuhr, T.S. Eliot, all people deeply Christian and entering into the conversation with the culture at the highest level. Now, why that was true 75 years ago and is less true today is an interesting question, worth exploring. But I would put Fulton Sheen very much in that company. In fact, he was influenced by a lot of those same people. And maybe he was the most influential and impactful of those figures. But as Bishop Tom was saying, how wonderful that this Catholic bishop was in primetime television in very lively dialogue with the American culture. That's something of importance for us today. You know, for my generation, actually, Sheen was not a major figure. We thought of him as someone that our parents listened to. My father, who was not a demonstrative man at all, but one time said to me about Sheen, I liked what he said and I liked how he said it. And I think that sums up a lot of people in his generation. But frankly, we didn't really follow Sheen. But he skipped over our generation to the next. And I think largely because of EWTN. They began to play his talks and presentations. And so the next generation became devotees of Fulton Sheen. And I'll say humbly, I kind of came back to him through my students at Mundelein. I knew they were following Sheen, and that got me interested again in him. But as I say, remarkably relevant for our time. And I just want to express in terms of three qualities of Sheen that I think are important. The first one is Sheen's intelligence. The second is Sheen's joyfulness. And the third is Sheen's holiness. And I'll say something brief about each one of those. Anyone who's been following me over the years knows that I am the bitter opponent of dumbed down Catholicism. My generation, we were the first generation to get this very flattened out, dumbed down approach to the faith. I refer to it as banners and balloons Catholicism. That's religion class when I was a kid. A very interesting moment to me, this is many years ago, Cardinal George showed me his 6th grade religion book. This would have been probably circa 47 or 48. It was extraordinary. Now, maybe some in the room remember, but here was a very high-level text with complex vocabulary, serious ideas being shared with a 6th grade young Catholic. Compared to my education as a 6th grader, night and day. Fulton Sheen was a very smart man. That's an important thing to know about him. Educated up at St. Paul Seminary in the Twin Cities. That's where I send my seminarians now from Winona, Rochester. Catholic University, but most famously at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. He received the famous and rarely given agrégé, which is an advanced doctorate from Louvain. He wrote books at the highest academic level. Look at his book on the mystical body, If You Doubt Me. And then for 20 years, Fulton Sheen taught at Catholic University. So he was writing articles and teaching and writing books at the highest academic level. So when he began his evangelical and more popular work, it was undergirded and informed by a very profound intelligence. Watch Sheen again today. You'll notice, absent from his rhetoric would be the formal, argot of the academy. But all his talks were intelligent. All his talks were informed by the Catholic intellectual tradition, and he didn't patronize his audience. I don't know what it was. I'd love to look into that historically. Why in about 1967 did the leaders of the Catholic Church decide that even adults can't handle anything intellectually challenging. But when it came to kids, make it as simplistic as you possibly can. That was a pastoral disaster, that decision. And I say it now without hesitation because you can see it in the statistics. People who have disaffiliated from the church will often say, because I didn't get my serious questions answered. Well, see, Sheen never dumbed down the faith, never was patronizing to his audience. In that way, he does remind me of his fellow Illinoisan, Abraham Lincoln. Dig out, if you've got it in your library somewhere, the Lincoln-Douglas debates from 1858. And these are debates that were delivered in front of Illinois farmers standing in the mud of the fields. And they went on for 2-3 hours of detailed, complex argumentation. And again, Lincoln and Douglas weren't talking to academics. They were talking to ordinary people. Just as Lincoln didn't patronize his audience, Sheen didn't. And I think that is exceptionally important lesson for us today. One of the marks of Sheen's great intelligence is the ease with which he gave his talks. So like any master in his field, Sheen made it look easy, right? Out he would come in front of the camera in the full regalia of a Catholic bishop, and then would give what seemed to be just a breezy 25-minute, conversation. Do you know how Sheen prepared his talks? He said he wrote them all out longhand. Now, this is before computers, so he's literally writing out these speeches. 25-minute talk would be, probably 10 pages of text. Then he said he would deliver the speech without the notes. He'd kind of memorize the notes and then deliver it in his room in French and in Latin, just so they would get into his system, so that when he came out to give his talk, it looked so breezy and so effortless because so much intellectual effort went into the production of it. Can I share a story that I think only a handful of people would know, because I got it from a man that many in this room would know, the priest, Father Willard J. Bush. He taught homiletics at Mundelein for many years. He wrote the song, The King of Glory. We remember that from years ago. Anyway, he taught homiletics at Mundelein. And he told us a story about when he was a student in the 1950s, and the great Fulton Sheen came out to deliver a talk on homiletics. And he told the students really what I just told you. He said, when you write your sermons, you should write them out longhand, word for word. And then J. Bush told us he had a sheaf of papers in his hand. And then he said, and then you should throw the papers away. And he threw the papers out at the students. Because why should you, made in the image and likeness of God, be held captive to a piece of paper? And he was making just this point that his method was the combination of the best of both. It had the logical structure and coherency of something carefully written out, and the at least seeming spontaneity of off-the-cuff discourse. And I must say, I've tried to follow that in my own public speaking, is that Sheen combination. But it's one of the signs of his extraordinary intelligence. Just a last one, also I think very important for our time. Sheen knew the Catholic intellectual tradition, yes. In fact, he said he at one point read every single word of Thomas Aquinas in Latin. He made sure he read everything Aquinas had ever written in the original language. So he knew that, but he was also a careful student of the culture. In his times, I think, 40s, 50s, 60s, psychology was all the vogue. And Sheen went into it. He studied it. He delved into Freudian psychology and so on. And it's a sign of that great, I think, gift of the evangelist to have, as Karl Barth famously said, the Bible in one hand, the newspaper in the other. And Sheen's intelligence, delved into the culture as well. So that's the first thing. Second thing I think is so important is Sheen's joyfulness. Fulton Sheen could be sharply critical when he felt it was appropriate. Go back to the 40s and early 50s when, mind you, it was not commonly accepted to be very critical of Soviet Russia. We had been allies of Soviet Russia in the Second World War. And many people, especially on the left, were very wary of critiquing Russia. Well, during those years, Sheen did indeed speak out very strongly against communism. So he knew how to be critical. But I'll say this, you look at the totality of his work, sharp polemics is not the Fulton Sheen style. Rather, I would say it's what Cardinal Dolan has called affirmative orthodoxy. That is to say, not so much saying what we're against. He did some of that. But I think that the prevalent form in Sheen was very much what we're for. What is the church for and why? And then the obvious joy he took in the orthodoxy that he held. There is something, too, in Sheen's approach that's like C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. He knew he was talking to a wide audience in America, not just Catholics, but to Protestants and Jews, and a very much a like-minded approach when it came to ethics and so on. And there is, I think, that joyful outreach to a very wide audience was typical of Sheen. Do you know someone who really admired him was Robert Schuller? Remember him? The Crystal Cathedral. In fact, if now the Catholic Church owns the Crystal Cathedral. It's the cathedral for San Diego, for Orange. But when you go on that campus during Schuller's time, you'd see statues of great preachers, and he had all the, the expected Protestant figures. But there was a great image of Fulton Sheen as well. And didn't Schuller rather affect a Sheen-like look, even with the white hair and so on? I think it's clear he was trying to imitate Fulton Sheen. But to me, that's a sign of Sheen's joyful, broad-minded approach that I think is important. There's a wonderful picture. I think it's in Sheen's autobiography, and it shows him as a relatively young man, not yet a bishop. I think he was a Monsignor, but in the robes, the cassock, and he has his hand gesturing outward, and he's in the deep South someplace, and there's a sign at his feet, and it says, questions cheerfully answered. And he's got a big smile on his face. And you can imagine him facing down maybe a crowd of, Bible Belt Protestants. But there he was, boldly in public, cheerfully answering questions. That to me is a great image of Sheen. On the theme of joyfulness, Bishop Tom mentioned, his primetime show. If, please God, one day he's canonized, he'll be the first saint to have won an Emmy, which I think is lovely. But it is true that the leading comics of the time, think Milton Berle, think Jackie Gleason, think Jack Benny, all very much admired Sheen's comic timing. And you watch him today, and it's true, he does have that feel for a joke. I have a little book called The Wit and Wisdom of Fulton Sheen, and maybe a number of his jokes would seem a little corny to us. A famous one, when he was absent for a while for some reason from the air, he came on and just said, "Long time no Sheen." Yeah, kind of a groaner. Maybe his best line, though, is when he won the Emmy, and he got up to the podium and said, "I want to thank my writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John." But here's the thing about humor and preaching, which I think is interesting. I grew up with the clownish homilies. Nobody wants that. Just we're sharing all kinds of cutesy pie stories. No one wants that. But I think what humor can accomplish when done tastefully is a kind of turning over of the soil of the soul. When you're preaching, you're dealing with the deepest, most serious matters in life. You're dealing with joy and with redemption and salvation and the danger of damnation and sin and grace and the most serious things. Well, if you're completely humorless in your approach, that can be just very daunting to an audience, and they're unable to open their hearts enough to receive the word. And I think what Sheen knew, and a lot of the great speakers know, is a little bit of humor, rightly shared, can open up the soil a bit and allow the seed of the gospel to be planted. And I think he used humor in just that way. Now, I bring up Sheen's joyfulness because, and I've been at this for a while, in the Catholic, social media world. In many ways, I hate the Catholic social media world because it's so dominated by screaming polemics. And may I say, you're an outsider. Let's say you're a sincere seeker. You want to know what these Catholics are all about, or you're seeking the Lord Jesus Christ. And you go on a lot of Catholic websites and you find vituperation and polemics and us against them and the comments and everybody's fighting. Would you be attracted to that? I wouldn't. That's one reason why Word on Fire from the beginning, we adopted, I pray, a kind of Sheen approach. not marked by harsh polemics and the sharp disagreements and so on, but more affirmative orthodoxy, which we indeed recognize as one of our key principles. I think, people have said to me sometimes over the years, why didn't you tell these people unless they convert, they're going to hell? My answer is, you really think that would have been effective? You really think that would have been an effective method? Well, more power to you if you do. I'm sticking with Fulton Sheen, I think is a better way to do it. Last one. So Sheen's intelligence, Sheen's joyfulness, finally his holiness. Please God, he will be canonized. I think that what I've been able to gather from some people I've talked to in Rome, it's that the window for the statute of limitations was open in New York about sexual abuse cases. And I think they're just waiting to see if anyone would claim that Sheen mishandled a case. I think that's all that's holding it back at the moment. Because we are right on the verge of beatification. I think it was one of the New York bishops said we better be careful. That's what I understand of the situations. But my point is, please God, he will be canonized, because I think he was much more than just an effective evangelist. I think he really was a deeply holy man. You can see it many ways. I think one of the most powerful is the holy hour. I think if he is canonized, he'll be known as the saint of the holy hour. Sheen, as you know, made central to his own spiritual life spending an hour of uninterrupted prayer in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament every single day. Weekdays, weekends, yes. On vacation, yes. No matter what, yes. When he was sick, yes. That holy hour became the anchor to his spiritual life. And furthermore, he said he never once gave a talk to priests or a retreat without recommending the holy hour. I've tried to follow that. First of all, in my own life, and again, I'll say it with humility, when I was a young priest, if you had said to me, have you done your holy hour, I probably wouldn't have known what that meant. It wasn't a practice in our time. But we learned it. And I learned it from my students at Mundelein who began to practice the holy hour. And now it's so fundamental to my own spiritual life that I wouldn't live without it. And I have that same practice whenever I talk to priests. I'll say, do a holy hour every day. Here's a couple quotes I love from Sheen talking about the holy hour. He says, looking into a sunset, the face takes on a golden glow. Looking at the Eucharistic Lord for an hour transforms the heart in a mysterious way, as the face of Moses was transformed after his companionship with God on the mountain. Basking in the light of the Blessed Sacrament was key to him. What are you doing during that time? Well, in a way, Sheen said it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. You work on a sermon. You can pray for people, have asked you to pray for them. You can pray your office. You can sit in quiet meditation. It doesn't really matter. What matters is taking the time and simply being in the presence of the Lord. And then this I love. Sitting dutifully before the tabernacle, he said, I'm like a dog at the master's door, ready in case he calls. I reread his autobiography not long ago. He was very attuned to his own weaknesses and his own temptations and his own imperfections. Listen to some of these quotes. He knew that he suffered from a certain vanity. Listen, when I was a priest, I thrilled at being called father. I found the title of Monsignor mellifluous. I confess the joy at the privileges that are given to a bishop, his place at table, the extra soft prie-dieu, the reverence born of faith. And then he goes on. I enjoyed the prestige of being a university professor. I was popular. I was sought after. I was a friend of royalty and the masses. But then he says, but how close was I to the cross? I mean, he knew that this was a temptation for him, but that what he needed was the cross, which means a life of self-gift and self-sacrifice. And then this, since I would not take up the cross, the Lord would lay it on my back. And that's how he interpreted suffering in his life. And everyone in this room, we all know, we all suffer, right? How do you read it? Oh, it's just dumb suffering. No, the Lord placing a cross on our backs that maybe we're not willing to place on our own. I was just very struck by that, because maybe you don't see that right away with Sheen. He seemed so confident and so, in command. But he was aware of his limitations. Just the last thing now about his holiness is he was a man on mission. This is deeply biblical, everybody. There's nobody in the Bible, there's not one exception to this. Nobody is ever given an experience of God without being sent on mission. And that's true of all of us. Think of from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and Joshua and Isaiah and Jeremiah, Daniel, any of them. And now Peter and Paul, John, Andrew, any of the apostles. No one's ever given an experience of God without being sent. Now what you've received, give. That was Fulton Sheen, it seems to me. He was a great academic, but he didn't enter into academics in a purely contemplative spirit, the way, let's say, a really high scholar might do. For Sheen, it was always for the sake of mission. He wanted to read every word of Thomas Aquinas so he could share that with the world. There's a lovely line where when he was about to accept the invitation to do radio work, the Catholic Hour, when many of his colleagues at Catholic U said to him, no, don't cheapen yourself with radio, stay at the high level, and you don't want to do this popular work. And Sheen said, no, I see the walls of my classroom expanding outward. And I think that's dead right, that what he cultivated during those years as a scholar and teacher, he saw now I can bring it to the world. And then a fortiori in television, when, as Bishop Paprocki said, at the height of his powers, staggering audience he had, and the number of letters that came to him. Well, that's what happens when you give away what you've been given. When grace turns into mission, that's what happens. So, as I accept that beautiful award with great gratitude to everybody here, we need Fulton Sheen. We need his intelligence today in the way we evangelize. We need his joy in the way we evangelize. We need his keen sense of mission. God bless everybody. Thanks again for the award.